in his usual Friday spot. Ladies and gentlemen, from NFL Network, NFL Media Group's finest, Tom Pelissero back on the program. What's up, Tom?
I heard you guys talk about Dak's jacket. I grabbed something off the rack. This is probably the closest I can come. It's definitely not as sparkly. I just thought, and I'm telling you this, just sitting in front of these lights, the jacket over the hoodie is hot. Okay. It's not what I would want to be wearing after playing a 3-hour game where we've run 95 plays and scored 40-plus points. Wouldn't be what I would go to, but I understand it. Dak's a fashion.
I'm just going to go on a limb and say you have a different gland makeup than Dak Prescott. Just going to go on that limb, Tom. No offense to your glandular system or anything like that, but you could take the jacket off. I mean, I don't want you to be so hot that you can't get
it is toasty in here. I wasn't anticipating the glandular system reference on this show either. I'm like going back to high school biology and trying to remember what the hell you're talking about.
It's okay. We already used what's the word that I used you liked? Vigor?
Vigor.
You like that?
Good one.
Yep.
Underused.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Tom. What's going on with Jonathan Taylor's thumb? What's happening? What do you got for me there?
He underwent surgery on it. Not a season-ending type of deal, but it's going to be a little bit here for Jonathan Taylor to be able to get back onto the field. Now, Jonathan Taylor was playing excellent when he was out there on the field. He finally was starting to look like Jonathan Taylor again. Then obviously it's something that he played throughout the second half of that game. They decided to get it taken care of. It wasn't anything that was going to be a long-term type of an issue for him, but it's a shot to a Colts team that's, with Gardner Minshew, a backup quarterback out there, has been getting better and better. And, Shane Steichen's kind of been finding a way forward here.
Okay. So what are we thinking? 2 weeks? What's your sense you're getting there? Just a couple games?
2 to 3 weeks is what it sounds like. Now, obviously they could decide to go the conservative route and put him on IR, which would take him out 4 games, but this is also the time of year where you kind of want, even if they think it might be 4 weeks for Jonathan Taylor, you kind of want the opponent going into each week thinking, well, maybe this is the week that Jonathan Taylor's back. There's always some gamesmanship when it goes into those roster moves late in the season.
Well, their next home game, 3 games from now, they're at Tennessee, at Cincinnati. This is definitely a personal reason why I'm asking. I'm calling Steelers at Colts on the Saturday middle game of our doubleheader on NFL Network in Week 15. So is that a circle game for Jonathan Taylor, potentially? A circle coming back or right around that realm?
Possibility.
Right,
that would probably be the logical target date. I always enjoy when we get to the portion of the schedule where everything just says TBD. Week 18 is fully TBD. This week of the season that you're talking about was like almost everything is to be determined. There's a lot of people having to adjust travel plans.
The TBD for the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. Where are we right now, Friday before Browns at Rams? What do you got for me there, Tom?
Unless something dramatically changes over the next 48 hours, it's going to be Joe Flacco getting the start, which it makes sense for a variety of reasons. This will be the 4th quarterback they've had. Flacco just got there a couple of weeks ago, but he's played in a pretty similar offense, both when he was with the Broncos years ago. Everybody kind of, I think, has blocked out that year of Joe Flacco's career, as well as when he was with the Jets more recently than that. And you watched him. So I was on the field last year when the Jets mounted that crazy comeback that I think, Rich, you and like 3 other people across the country were actually watching. Yeah. They're down 13 points in the final 2 minutes. I'm on the Browns sideline waiting for, Browns victory interview, and here we go. And Jimmy Haslam's right in front of me. They blow a 13-point lead in the final 2 minutes. And Joe Flacco ran that 2-minute drive as efficiently as you're ever going to see it. And watching it at field level was really cool because, a lot of stuff's been said through the years about Flacco, but he's really smart. He understands offense. He does have one of the things with Joe Flacco that like the people from the Kyle Shanahan tree always talk about is how fast his arm is. Like he's really, even though everything with Joe is kind of big and it looks slower and he's not going to run, his arm is fast twitch. So he can get the football out, probably play more efficiently than P.J. Walker, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, even Deshaun Watson have at times this year. He's not as physically talented as DTR or certainly Watson, but there are elements of this that they're hoping Flacco is going to be able to do enough at a time that you're still thinking our defense is really good and can help us win a lot of these games.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. And look, it's always tough to talk about hot seats because we're talking about human beings and families and stuff like that. But are we done, do you think, seeing interim head coaches in the league this year? Or do you think somebody could go even in the next 6 weeks? What do you think, Tom?
It's certainly possible. And I think that a month ago, you would have heard a lot of, okay, things are bad in Carolina, but there's no way Frank Reich is out. And I know that owner David Tepper did not want to make the move when he did, but it just gets to a certain point and you're counting down the weeks and you're thinking we need something that we can build off of here. I think that it was telling when Sean McDermott, when he made the move with Ken Dorsey, when he flat out said, he was asked repeatedly, why do you have to make the move? Well, we got to walk back into that locker room in 5 days, and I need the guys to know something has changed. Same thing in Washington with the defensive coordinator move. It's a little bit of the same thing in Carolina, although the bigger thing there is we need to get something out of these next 6 weeks for Bryce Young. We got to have some kind of positivity. He can't just keep getting beaten into the ground behind a depleted offensive line running the same system that hasn't generated points the entire season. I think that as you look at some of the other places, and we certainly can talk about, I think some of them are obvious here. The Commanders have made abundantly clear with Josh Harris, they're not going to do anything further before the end of the season. So I would not anticipate Ron Rivera's out prior to the end of the regular season. The Chargers historically have not done anything during the regular season here. And really, when you look at the Chargers, they're not getting blown out in games. The locker room remains really good. They just haven't figured out how to close these games. They got a bad Patriots team up next. You would think if they can take care of business there, they're right back there on the edge of the playoff picture. With New England, I don't know that that's going to be a firing in general. It's a more complicated thing when you're talking about the greatest coach of all time. I would not anticipate right now that anything is going to happen within the course of the season. And some of the other teams that have been speculated about a lot, like Chicago, they're kind of finding ways to win games. They've been a lot better on defense since they traded for Montez Sweat. I was at that game in Minnesota on Monday night that I don't think anything is going to end up in Canton from that one. But they kind of won the way the Bears have to win right now, which is just grimy and grind the game down and generate some turnovers and find a way. So, right now, Rich, there's nothing that I would say, unlike Carolina, where in recent weeks it was very much, okay, if this keeps going this direction, we could get a change. It was the same thing with the Raiders where you knew things were bad. I don't know that there's any other place that's this bad, but, check back with me Monday morning. That's this time of year.
Yeah, I hear you. I know. And so the Jets are on the precipice, one would think, and there's many different precipices that they're on the brink of. And Rodgers had his window opened up. What's your hearing or what's your knowledge of how he's looked in the first couple of days of that window opening? Or has he done anything? I know I saw the Jets tweeting out him in slow motion spinning it. I mean, there's never been a question of him spinning it. The question is will the Jets be viable enough for him to want to come back behind a line that is dreadfully performing? So what do you think?
I would say this, and I've talked to a lot of people who are familiar with it. I think that all along there has been a great deal of skepticism everywhere, externally, internally, that Aaron Rodgers is really going to be able to pull this off. Now, I texted somebody there yesterday and just said, it looks like he could probably go out and play flag football right now. And the answer I got was, LOL, he would light it up. Because right now you're watching Aaron Rodgers standing still. He still can throw the ball. Everything about, his upper body mechanics and all that is perfectly fine. And he's so smart, he's going to be able to play above the level of a lot of different things, distribute the football. And you would think he'd find a way, if he's out there, to function. But what he hasn't had to do is move, and he hasn't had to get hit. And if you even go back to those first 4 snaps of his only appearance so far with the Jets, what did we see? He got hit on 2 of those plays, and he tore his Achilles on one of them. So there is still a growth process here. Rodgers very much continues to say, listen, next week, I'm going to try to ramp it up. Maybe I can even get back before Christmas Eve. That would, Rich, I would fairly tell you this, that would shock people. Rodgers playing this season would still shock people to the extent that they can be shocked about a guy who's back on the practice field less than 3 months after an Achilles. So they've got to play the Falcons this week. This is going to be a big game for the defense. We'll see if they can do something more offensively. Maybe, Alan Lazard getting sat down for a week might have, shocked something into him. Maybe Breece Hall kind of getting called out a little bit about not getting the hard yards and always looking for the home run. Maybe you get a little bit more out of him. They got to find a way to win a game. As long as they can find a way to win a game, you're going to, be back in the spot where you were 4 weeks ago before they went on this, brutal stretch, especially offensively, which is, hey, They're still alive. There's still a chance. And you've got a quarterback who, not just for the energy in the building, which it sounds like really has had a positive impact by Rodgers being back, but also for Rodgers himself to say, you know what, I want to do something that's not been done. I want to set a goal here. I want to try to get back onto the field. He's still got to get out of those shoes that are 2 sizes too big. I mean, there's a lot of benchmarks he's still got to cross, but he's been proceeding at a pace we have not seen. And until the Jets are mathematically out of this thing, it sounds like he's going to continue to proceed that way.
What are you hearing, Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show? I had Dean Blandino on earlier this week, former head of NFL refs, now Fox Rules analyst. We spent about a half an hour talking about the state of officiating, and I said essentially that this is, at the very least, a perception problem. And I know that makes fans come across as hysterical because we're seeing a lot that just is a head scratcher or just flat out being missed. We're seeing a lot of officiating look poor, straight up. And last night, Thursday Night Football, we saw a ton of penalties. The grand total number of penalty yards, it was kind of evenly split between both teams. It was 257 penalty yards. After the game, Pete Carroll had 10 of the penalties of the 19 that got not called but agreed to. He said, quote unquote, we've got to get out of that kind of football. So what do you make of that comment, and what is happening behind the scenes? What is the conversation in regards to NFL officiating one game into Week 13, Tom?
Well, you could certainly see Pete's frustration, at the halftime interview when he said, I want to say it was, I'm disturbed by some of the calls. He was asked after the game about it and just said it was wow. And I think that, when you watch some of the replays, at least a couple of them that jumped out at me, there was one where you had a DB who very briefly put his hand on the receiver's hip. It's hard to say that's a material restriction. But one of the things, Rich, and this has been playing out for a decade plus now, is with high definition TVs, with all the different replay angles, with social media, you're seeing so much more. And if you break it down frame by frame, there's a lot of things that you convince yourself that you're seeing that maybe in the past, when you only had one replay, during the game and you didn't have the high definition cameras, we wouldn't be seeing it. Last night was actually where you're seeing things swing back, where there's a bunch of things the officials are throwing the flags on that you don't see when you go back and look at it in slow-mo or in HD. And is that a reaction to the way that the league is pushing for certain things to be points of emphasis? That is certainly always a possibility. It also brings us to these broader conversations, Rich, that the competition committee has pushed back on in the past about whether or not you should have subjective calls be subject to replay. And the answer from the competition committee roundly has been, we don't want to go down that road. We don't want to substitute one person's judgment for another, particularly when that second person is not on the field watching this game in real time. So even when you get down to debates like the hip drop tackle, part of the reason there's nobody, I had somebody tell me who was very familiar with the thinking within the league on this. It was nobody's going to walk in that room next March or February for competition committee meetings and say, we want to keep that play in. But how do you write a rule describing that to the point that you don't have a whole bunch of flags that shouldn't be thrown on that play, or conversely, that everything starts getting, or nothing gets flagged because you can't actually define it? And that's a really fine line. We experimented with it once on pass interference. That was obviously a debacle to end all debacles. And so, and that was something that the competition committee opposed. They went to that March meeting. The coaches said, hey, we want to fix this. It's the most impactful play in the game. They put it in for 1 year. It was a mess. Second half of the season, they weren't calling anything. So I don't know that there's a lot of clear answers. I hear the things about we need full-time officials. We need to, adjust how guys are trained. I think that anytime you have more time on task, that helps. But the bottom line is we wouldn't know, Rich, even if officiating were better than it's ever been, we would not be able to tell because we are inundated with replays, with high definition TVs that keep getting better and better, with social media where you get freeze frames of one thing versus another, and you have this entire counterculture of NFL fans that's going to be following those types of things. I didn't think up until, probably, let's say a month ago or 6 weeks ago, that we really had any officiating controversies. You go back and look, I thought through the first 6 weeks of the season, there was virtually no conversation whatsoever about officiating. But then you have games like last night where, and I said this earlier today on the Insiders, the three stars of that game were Dak Prescott, DK Metcalf, and Clete Blakeman, who threw 19 enforced penalties for 250 plus yards. That was one of the driving things within that game. I don't think anybody wants to see that. There's some politics involved in terms of, when you have the players on the other team saying, hey, yeah, they're very grabby. That's not accidental that the Cowboys players are saying that before the game. How do you enforce it? How do you play? Pete Carroll's always played a physical style of defense. If you take that away, it does impact how these teams are going to game plan and scheme.
Yeah, my take was week 13 is my cause, my cleat. That's what we saw on Thursday night, So before I let you go, the usual.
That one's going to take me a while.
No
I'm not going to be able to get that one out of my head.
My cause, use it. Go ahead. My cause, my cleat. So what do you have in your notebook, sir, that I didn't ask you about before I let you go? What's the one thing that you're hearing, talking, what we should be talking about? Go for it. What do you have?
Well, when you talk about hot seats within the NFL, and I'll be close to this division coming up on this Sunday on game day morning, one of the things you hear a lot within the league is, does everybody who doesn't win the NFC South end up having significant changeover in the course of the offseason? Because right now you've got everybody in that division is at or below 500. There's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure, at least externally, on some of these organizations, whether that's in Tampa, which right now, is a 4-7 team, whether it is in New Orleans, where they've just been gashed by injuries throughout the course of this season. They got a new quarterback. They've had no consistency. They might be without like their top three receivers this week. Atlanta seems to be in a little different category. Really, they haven't spent a high pick or a lot of money on the quarterback position. That would maybe be the last piece. I haven't sensed that there's really any urgency there. But as this season plays out, that's certainly going to be worth keeping an eye on as we're upcoming here. And then, some of the other things, I think that you look at some of the players who potentially are going to be coming back from injury during the latter part of this season. Justin Jefferson is certainly a big part of it. I was told last week he was very close to playing in that Monday night game against Chicago. You certainly, in watching that game play out and watching how little separation the Vikings receivers were getting, you could say they really could have used him in that game. But that was a good example of how the Vikings do things, where it was clear and open communication throughout. They want to make sure the guy is 100% with the bye. He's got an extra week. They fully anticipate next week, full participation. He'll be 100%, and he'll be back on the field against the Raiders December 10th.
And then just real quick, the comment by Kevin O'Connell after that game is Josh Dobbs maybe out and Nick Mullins in? Like, what was that evaluation of the position comment that he said after that?
They are going to evaluate everything. That process started last week. I know that the coaches and everybody else was getting away through the course of this weekend, which with the way the buys are structured right now, Rich, these are long stretches. Teams like the Vikings with a week 13 bye, you're talking about from the start of camp, that's 4+ months with no time off. So everybody kind of taking a minute to reboot. I would tell you now, if I were making an educated guess, I would say it's still Josh Dobbs as the quarterback. But Nick Mullins has gotten healthier. He's played a lot in similar types of systems. They, of course, also have Jaron Hall, who they took in the 5th round out of BYU. He looked, at least looked like he could move around in that game against Atlanta, but he suffered a concussion on the second series here. So they do potentially have options. You would think, though, Jefferson coming back, Dobbs had a pretty good couple of games out of the gate. Let's see, when you get the best receiver in the NFL back on the field, how that might be able to help out Josh Dobbs. If it doesn't go well, or maybe they do decide to pivot, then you got a guy, Nick Mullins, who's played a lot of games.
Tom, you're the man. Have a great weekend. We'll chat next week, brother.
See you on Sunday, Rich.
You bet. That's Tom Pelissero right there on the Rich Eisen Show. How about that? Whoever doesn't win the NFC South, kaboom. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.